at 2-0 in Detroit. More wins at Ford Field than the Lions. Maybe we should play all our games there.
Buffalo fans. Hi everyone, this is Will O'Toole. Welcome you to a post-Thanksgiving Park Ridge Sports History show, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining me. Always extend a warm holiday, Thanksgiving holiday, post-holiday greetings to one and all, and thank you for joining me. This week, again, I'm going to go in three different directions, hopefully. One is with, of course, the Buffalo Bills and the Thanksgiving Day games. That Bills game was a classic. Wasn't greatly managed by the coaches. I thought there could have been some different outcomes, especially late in the game, but it was an exciting game. Buffalo has a great quarterback in Josh Allen. I just hope he can overcome this injury. It definitely affected him in some parts of the game against the Lions. And you got to give the Lions some credit. They had won a few games in a row. They were maybe thinking about an outside shot at a wild card berth in the playoffs, but that went down for naught with the big field goal as the game ended by the Bills. A bomb of a field goal by the Buffalo Bill field goal kicker. And with that, then the game's transitioned to really a rather boring Giant Cowboy game. I never thought that the Cowboys were going to lose the game. I even said that. Giants have not done particularly well on Thanksgiving Day. And I'm not saying that the Giants, well, first of all, they were really outplayed in the game against the Cowboys. And it really wasn't a fun game to watch. And yet, ironically, that happened to be the highest rated of all the games on Thanksgiving. A lot of reasons for that. Later in the day, quite a few people, my family included, we like to start about noontime with the Thanksgiving Day festivities. So you kind of come in and out of the Detroit game. We start with, the traditional cocktails and hors d'oeuvres, and then we make our way into the big feast of turkey and gravy, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, all the rest of it. And then you wind up with dessert after you've, added on quite a few pounds during that main meal. And then you fall asleep because of the turkey, and you kind of are seeing the end game of the Detroit Buffalo game. Although I will tell you this, I was right on top of that game. I was, for whatever reason, we actually took a break this year between, let's say, the hors d'oeuvres or the first part of the dinner and then the main meal, and it worked out well. But as a result, the one game that got the most attention by the nation's fans, the Cowboy-Giant game, I didn't really watch. And of the parts of the games I really watched, I thought the Cowboys just overwhelmed the Giants. It almost seems that there are just certain teams that just thrive on playing on Thanksgiving Day. And then there are others that, and I hate saying it, I always feel that the Giants seem to be in that realm. They really don't want to be there. They'd rather be home with their family. And I can understand that entirely. But I was really looking at this. I'm going to segue to the Giants because my cartoon about the Buffalo Bills, and of course they are buried under tons of snow, and you almost start to think, will they? It all depends on where Buffalo is next week, but could they move the game again, maybe to Syracuse, or I'm sure it's going to be in Buffalo in Rich Stadium, Orchard Park, but it will give them enough time to clean the area of the football stadium, which I had read that really all of the snow seemed to dump most of it on the Orchard Park area. I certainly am not laughing at the people who were buried in that and had to dig out. I just thought it was ironic that here are the Bills. They could be on their way to the NFL or AFC championship game and maybe to the Super Bowl. And in one of their great seasons ever with a great quarterback, great, bright young talent in Josh Allen And here they are having to potentially, they've already moved 2 of their games. They may have to move potentially maybe others. But I was just really enthralled with the way the Bills played the other day. Uh, I've been lucky. We have been able to see, at least in the New York metropolitan area, I think we've gotten to see 3 or 4 straight Bills games, because I did see the Minnesota game, thought they should have won that, had opportunities to win that game. Unfortunately, it ended on a Josh Allen interception instead of the Bills just settling for the field goal. And that was what I was thinking about with the Detroit game. I really felt Detroit late in that game played more for the tie than going for the win. I don't know whether other fans felt that. We were talking about that as we were watching the game coming down, and Detroit had its full complement of timeouts. Plus, they had the benefit of the 2-minute whistle. So it wasn't like they couldn't go after the winning touchdown or the potentially game-leading touchdown. I just felt as if they were happy to settle for the field goal, as if they didn't really believe they could take it all the way in and suck up most of the time and leaving the Bills with nothing. When the Bills got the ball, I really felt, first of all, they got helped by just with that 40-yard pass. What a bullet he threw. I mean, that as soon as he hit that, you knew the game was over. And it was just a matter of the Bills setting up the field goal kicker with a perfect shot at of making the field goal. But I just felt that the Lions were playing more for the tie rather than just going for the win. And really, they were playing as if this was an elimination, or Detroit should have been playing. Let me back that up. Detroit should have been playing as if it was an elimination game, because really, it turns out it was for the Lions. I don't see how they can manage to get into the playoffs. I haven't looked at the standings. I don't think they've been technically eliminated, but it's just too tough a road for them to get in there. And of course, they weren't helped with the Minnesota Vikings winning, beating the New England Patriots on Thanksgiving night. Another game that was pretty good. Didn't have the same drama, didn't have the same kind of climax as the Buffalo Detroit game, but nonetheless, it was the Bills game, then it was the Viking game, and then the third game, of course. I wouldn't even put the Cowboys in there because I got to be very honest with you. I actually switched watching Ole Miss and Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl on Thursday night and really enjoyed that game. It was played in the rain. Not one of the better games between the two rivals, but it was pretty dramatic. It was pretty exciting. And anytime you get a rivalry game, anything can happen. You can have an 0-11 team playing against an unbeaten team. And if it's a rivalry game, look out, because that can happen where there's an upset. But with Buffalo, and this is what got me thinking about this whole thing. I was thinking about the Giants, because when I was growing up, you remember, Giants played in Yankee Stadium for many years. I know they played in the Polo Grounds way back when. They may even played parts in Ebbets Field and all the rest. And I'm not going to go back that far. And I really didn't do all of my research on the Giants in the Polo Grounds or the Giants in Yankee Stadium. But I do remember one Giant game where they beat the Oilers in 72. And it was one of the first games that I ever saw at Yankee Stadium, because the NFL had lifted the blackout for the home games, as long as, at that point, as long as all the tickets were sold. And of course, Giant fans have been lining up for years to try to get those home, tickets to the games. So that was the very first game. And of course, I was an Oiler fan. I was rooting for the Oilers. They got destroyed by the Giants on that day. And I remember Giant fans thinking that, hey, maybe this was the season they were going to turn around, because they hadn't really been a good team, with the exception of 70, where they were over 500 and actually were on the brink of making a playoff had they beaten the Rams on the last game of the year. But they got annihilated in 1970 by the Rams in Yankee Stadium by Roman Gabriel. And they finished the season 9-5 and fell one game short to the Cowboys at 10-4. And of course, the Cowboys would make their first visit to the Super Bowl that year and lose dramatically on a field goal to Jim O'Brien and the Colts. But anyway, I was looking at the Giants. So the Giants, they leave Yankee Stadium, and they were going to build, of course, the Meadowlands. But they didn't have the Meadowlands built, and their first game was 1976 there. But prior to that, they leave Yankee Stadium because remember, Yankee Stadium was also originally Yankee Stadium was going under alterations, and so the Yankees and the Giants had to vacate the premises. The Mets did allow the Yankees to play in Shea, and of course, people remember this in 1974, the Yankees playing at Shea really came within a couple of games of beating, actually 74 and 75. They came very close to winning the American League East. And in both cases, of course, the Baltimore Orioles outlasted both the Yankees and the Red Sox. In fact, in 74, the Red Sox, I believe, had a lead over the Orioles, and then they went in the tank. I think they lost 8 of 9. 8 of 9, and then Baltimore just overran them and won the division in 1974. And then in 75, and of course, this was the big change. I think this was one of George Steinbrenner's first managerial moves. He gets rid of Bill Verdon, who did a nice job with that 74 team, and he brings in Billy Martin for 1976. He got rid of Verdon at the end of the year. And that team, that 75 Yankee team, they had Bobby Bonds on it. Remember, they had traded for him. They got rid of him over the winter of 75, and they bring in Mickey Rivers and Ed Figueroa, who become two big pieces in the 76 pennant winning year for the Yankees. Man, and I apologize again. Things just progress on this show. I start out with some ideas, but it's like you and I are having a beer and a hamburger and things that come up in my mind, and we just go from there. So I hope you can kind of keep on the thread. It's about the Giants playing in other stadiums. Anyway, make a long story even longer. The Giants play in Yankee Stadium. They move to Shea, and they will also play in the Yale Bowl. But in 74, they played in the Yale Bowl first. And so I was looking at their record. Now, those Giants weren't very good. In fact, they were terrible, as I stated. Those Giant teams, ready for this, between like 1970, well, in 1970, they were 9-5. Let me just see if I can find the Giants. Ready for this? This is what I love. The 76 Giants, who we're going to talk about, they moved to Giant Stadium. They were 3-11 under Bill Arnsparger and John McVay. The 75 Giants under Bill Arnsparger were 5-9. They played at Shea. And the 74 Giants under Bill Arnsparger were 2-12. Now, who's Bill Arnsparger? He was the defensive guru, the genius behind the 53 defense, or the no-name defense of the Miami Dolphins, who in, of course, 72 and 73 went back-to-back Super Bowls. And, of course, that 72 team, actually, they go to 3 Super Bowls in a row, losing to the Cowboys. But that 72 team, of course, is unbeaten and remains as the team, the objective of every team to try to defeat their record. Of course, the team that came closest was the Patriots, who were unbeaten until they met the Giants in the Super Bowl and lost, ending their season at 17-1, I do believe. All right, so Arnsparger comes in, was a defensive core. Actually, the Giants didn't play bad defensively. They just had bad personnel. And that team played in the Yale Bowl. Here's the thing. So I was thinking, all right, maybe the Giants turn a page. Maybe they turn the corner, because the previous year under Alex Webster, now they have a new coach in Arnsparger, they go 2-11. The 72 Giants were 8-6. That was really their last winning team for a while. As a kid, I remember. In 71, they were 4-10. The 70 team is the one I remember because they were 9-5. And just go back one more year, in 69, before you had the merger, the Giants played in what they called the Century Division, and they finished 6-8. That 70 team, I have a story for that, but I'm going to save that for another day. But anyway, here they are in 71, playing in Yankee Stadium. They're 4-10 that year. In Yankee Stadium in 72, they're 8-6 in 1972. In 73, their first season and only season, I do believe, in the Yale Bowl. No, 2 years they played in the Yale Bowl. I'm sorry. Ready for this? They won 4 total games in 73 and 74. In that 73 season at the Yale Bowl, I don't believe they won a game. I just want to double check this. Okay. On Sunday, September 16th, and I'm using Football Reference, they beat the Oilers at the Yale Bowl. Maybe this is the game I'm thinking of. This is probably the game I'm thinking of. But I could have I could have sworn it was played. It was played at Yankee Stadium. It was played at Yankee Stadium. And then Yankee Stadium closes. Let's just see what their first game at the Yale Bowl, because now they tie the Philadelphia Eagles. Where was that game played? That game was also played at Yankee. Even though they say the Yale Bowl, let's just see something. In Green Bay, they played Green Bay. Their first game, of course, at the Yale Bowl was 73. They actually lose to Dan Devine, who wins the national championship with Notre Dame a few years later. But at Sunday, October 7th, 1973, the Giants lose their first game played at the Yale Bowl in front of 70,000 rabid Giant fans, probably some Green Bay fans filtered in as well. But at the Yale Bowl, they lose. The following year, I do believe the Giants lose all their games at the Yale Bowl, because in 1973, the Giants go 2-11-1. In 1974, that was 73. They go 2-12. The Giants do, and they won both games, I believe, on the road. They beat the Cowboys 14-6 in the first game on the road for them in 74. They beat the Cowboys 14-6, and of course, that wasn't quote unquote a good Landry team. They finished 8-6 that year, the Cowboys, and finished out of the playoffs. And then they won their second game and last game of the year, defeating the Kansas City Chiefs in at Kansas City. The game that they're probably most remembered for is the game November 10th, where they played their rivals from New York, the New York Jets. And they lose that game, I do believe. Joe Namath has a 3-yard rush, and he scores a touchdown to tie the game. And then Joe Namath completes a 5-yard pass in overtime to Emerson Boozer to defeat the Giants 26-20. And what's fun about that game, wow, I can't believe some of the players. The Jets took an early lead, 7-0. Then Pete Gogolak, who should have been, I believe he played at Princeton, Gogolak, so he might be used to Yale, the Yale Bowl. He made the score 7-3. Then Bob Tucker put the Giants in front 10-7. Then Leahy ties the game. Then Gogolak hits another field goal. Then Leahy ties it again. Then Bob Grimm. Now, I know Bob Grimm. He was a guy who was traded for Fran Tarkenton, one of the worst Giant trades, probably one of the worst trades in New York sports history. One of them, anyway, because he's reunited with his Fran Tarkenton is reunited with the Vikings. Remember, he started his career with the Vikings. And then Bob Grimm catches a touchdown from Craig Morton, ex-Cowboy. Gogolak adds the kick. Now they're up 20-13. And then, like I stated, the Jets do all the final scoring. The Jets come back. They score, I believe it was a quarterback sneak. It was Namath just faked and went basically a bootleg to an empty side of the end zone. Everybody had drifted over on the Giants, if you ever see the thing, and he just waltzed in or limped in because of those 2 bad knees. And then, of course, he completes a pass in overtime to Emerson Boozer, one of the heroes of the Super Bowl from 1968-69. Then the Giants, I have to be happy and say this. The Giants moved to the Meadowlands in 1976. Well, they played at Giant Stadium. Let me just say that. Before they played at Giant Stadium, they played at Shea for the 75 season. They went 5-9. And I think that at Shea Stadium, they win their first game of the year against the Eagles. They play 3 games on the road. and are 1-2, come home to the Cowboys Sunday, October 12th, at Shea Stadium and lose to the Cowboys 13-7. Remember a guy by the name of Gene Fugit who breaks, or the Giants are ahead 7-6, and he catches Staubach tosses a game-winning 4-yard pass to Gene Fugit, who was a pretty good tight end for the Cowboys, very valuable. I know that he sometimes in the early part of his career would alternate with Mike Ditka, and because I'll tell you, he one of the things I think that set the Cowboys apart from many of the teams in the NFC East, it seemed, they just seemed to have depth at many of what we call the skill positions and even the unskilled positions, because it just seemed that Landry would just put in guys nonstop. So the line would change. I remember Dave Manders being the center, and then it would, you have Blaine Nye and Nyland. And then all of a sudden they'd be bringing in and Rayfield Wright. They would be the anchor. Then he'd be moving in other guys. They were just really a testimony to a great organization who used their personnel to their fullest. Almost like Landry adopted the same rules for managing his players that Earl Weaver did. And it was this: don't tell me what a guy can't do. Tell me what he can do to help the club. And I just thought that Landry was masterful that way. I remember that they traded for Lance Allworth, and he got a Super Bowl ring with the Cowboys in the 72 season. I remember them claiming, of course, Ditka from the Bears, and he helped them out in 2 Super Bowls. So they were always doing something, and he was masterful with the way he used Walt Garrison and Dan Reeves, guys probably who wouldn't be starting for any other team, but he was able to rotate running backs in and out. It just seemed more efficiently than a lot of the other teams in the NFC East, and I think I have to be right, only because just take a look at Landry getting to the playoffs every year. That's not by luck. A lot of it's by design. So then the Giants, they finally leave Shea Stadium. They go to the Meadowlands. Let me just see if I can find this, because that's 1976. They finally move into the Meadowlands. And they go 3-11 under Arnsparger. Actually, they were 3-11 that year. Arnsparger is fired after an 0-7 start. And John McVay, who, of course, every Giant fan knows, John McVay would be their coach for the next 3.5 years. And I do believe that he was on the bad end of that famous fumble in the Meadowlands against the Philadelphia Eagles. That game, of course, 17-19. And in that game, of course, the final score, the Giants were winning, and instead of just falling on the ball, Herm Edwards picks up a fumble and races 26 yards for a touchdown and it's a game-winning touchdown because the Eagles at that point were down 17-12 after a Mike Hogan 1-yard run to get him closer. And, of course, that would be the beginning, probably the darkest moment in Giant history over the last 40, 50 years. But really, in the darkness comes the light, because then it's almost like the NFL moved in. They changed GMs on the Giants. They were able to secure Phil Simms. Eventually, Ray Perkins would be their guide to their first playoff, 1981, and then he would be taken over. He would go to Alabama, and then Parcells would take over and, of course, guide the Giants to their first 2 Super Bowls. But anyway, in that 76 year with the Giants, this is just amazing. All right, the Giants lost their first 4. They come home on October 10th, playing their first game, Columbus Day weekend, at Giant Stadium, and in front of a packed crowd, they lose 24-14. Even though they never had a lead, they were actually down at one point 17-0 and made it look kind of good, 24-14, as ex-Miami Dolphin Larry Zonka scores on a 6-yard rush. Kind of interesting. And, of course, the Giants would go on to glory at Giant Stadium, win a couple of Super Bowls playing there, and then would move in at 2010. Let me just see if I can get this. Giants 2010 to their new home in the Meadowlands. And they would win, actually, their very first game there. Actually, just to go back, ready for this? They lose to the Cowboys in their first game. They would get their first win against the Redskins on 11-14-76. And then proceed to win like 4 of their next 5 games in the Meadowlands. So it was hopefully bringing them some good things. Oh, man, those were games. Ready for this? The 1970. Just take a look at this. The 76 year of the Giants. You had the Rookie of the Year with Sammy White of Minnesota. You have Mike Haynes, who was the defensive back for New England. Burt Jones was the Offensive Player of the Year in the AFL or the AFC. And the Defensive Player of the Year in the AFC was Jack Lambert. The leading passer was Burt Jones. He had 3,100 yards passing. Now, they only played at that point 14 games, but still, it was still a run-oriented offense. Then only slowly, probably with the emergence of, new rules to liberating the wide receiver and clamping down on defensive back, with Air Coryell coming into being in San Diego, you see more and more of coaches really saying, you know what? I really only have to be successful 1 of 3 times to keep a drive going with a pass, as long as that pass goes 10 yards. And it seems to be certainly easier to pass a ball for 10 yards than it is to run a ball for 10 yards. How do you know that? Take a look at probably the worst quarterback in NFL history. They probably have a higher yards attempt completion than the greatest running back, Jim Brown, has on the ground. Brown, of course, ran for an average of 5.2, which is still terrific. But yes, it definitely is, 90. It's just a little over halfway to 10 yards. Meanwhile, you can probably take the worst quarterback of all time, and you can see that at least they're throwing at an average of 8 yards or 7 yards every pass. All right, so it would take you two completions to keep it going. I think you know what I mean, though. And ready for this? The leading receiver was a guy by the name of Roger Carr. Now, I remember Roger Carr. He was 81. He, like I do believe Fred Biletnikoff, used to cut the sleeves and open so that when they ran, it almost looked like their sleeves would flap. It almost looked like they were wings on a bird. But he caught and ran for over 1,100 yards for that Colt team that always seemed to be good. They would win the AFC East, but they would always go down. They just weren't good enough to beat the Oakland Raiders or the Pittsburgh Steelers. Ready for that year? 76 saw the Colts and the Patriots. I remember that Patriot team because they probably should have beaten Oakland in Oakland. Of course, that was a buzzsaw team, that Oakland team. The Steelers were 10-4. The Bengals were 10-4. Actually, that Steeler team, they were 10-4. The Raiders would be 13-1, and the Broncos, you can see them starting to get good, because by 78 they would make the by the following year they would make the Super Bowl. They were 9-5, that Bronco team, and then of course their great runs would be with the John Elways. All right, now got one more cartoon. This is a little lengthy, but it has everything to do with college football. And just watch.
How can the mega conferences keep TCU out of the playoffs?
TCU has a better point differential than USC. TCU has scored more points than Alabama.
Hey, gads! TCU beat their rivals on the road, while Ohio State lost to Michigan by 22 points at home.
And TCU's undefeated and 5-0 against ranked opponents.
question. Extended invite to the Big Ten or the SEC to TCU.
All right. In case you realize already, I'm a bigger college football fan than I am NFL. I just love college football, and this is the reason why I love it. Now, is it a perfect system, the playoffs? No. Do I think that they are going to expand it? Yes. Is it going to benefit the mega conferences eventually? Yes. How do I know that? Just take a look at probably what you're going to see come out within the next 2 days, and that is the top 20 for college football. Georgia's going to be on top, probably Michigan. They're probably going to bump or supersede TCU. And it's understandable, and we get into that in a minute. And then that number 4 spot is going to be interesting because do they drop Ohio State to 4 or do they move up somebody? Because last night, because I'm taping this Sunday morning, last night, of course, LSU lost. I actually think USC will jump up because they defeated Notre Dame, even though Ohio State beat Notre Dame. All right. But you will probably see Ohio State because it used to be if you lost late, man, that really hurt you more than if you lost early because then you can gain some momentum again. And right now, USC, which lost early about 2 months ago, when I think about it, they lost way back when to Utah, and Utah, of course, is 9-3. They've been on a roll and defeating Notre Dame. And I was thinking about this. Okay, Michigan has Ohio State. Auburn has Alabama. Probably you would say Florida State has Miami. North Carolina has Duke. But I really think in football that I would love to ask a USC fan, but I bet you that they look at Notre Dame because I do. I always base my season on how well Notre Dame does against USC. Because for years, when I was growing up, they never beat USC unless they were winning a national title. They beat them in 66. They beat them in 73, and they beat them in 77. All the other years, they used to lose to USC. So I always thought that USC was Notre Dame's biggest rival. I could be wrong. I know a lot of people might say, no, it's Purdue, but they don't play Purdue in and out every year. But anyway, that's standing. I can see now what happens with TCU. So you have Georgia, you have Michigan from the mega conferences. You probably have TCU because they really can't deny TCU at this point. And why? I'm going to go over that. TCU beat, and I mentioned this last week, they beat 4 ranked opponents in a row, all from the Big 12, okay, which is now seen as a little sister compared to, or a little brother compared to these mega conferences this year with the Big Ten and the SEC. But TCU won last night. They get Kansas State, which is going to be even ranked higher this week. They're a nice little team. I'm not saying they're great, but it's a very good team. They could and they will give TCU some fits. And I'm first to say that TCU, when I'm doing the numbers with them and stuff, they're not a buzzsaw team, but they're of the 4. I found them to be the most exciting because you don't know how many points they're going to fall behind and then rally to eventually win. Take a look at some of their wins. Oklahoma State, they were way out. I think they were like 17-18 down and beat them in OT. It was amazing. Just Baylor, who they see as their chief rival. I didn't know this. They were down by about 10 or 11 with just minutes left, and they hit that last second field goal. Had they not hit that field goal, we would not be talking about TCU. And this is 2 weeks in a row I'm talking about TCU. But after you get those 4, who do you go to next? USC is probably going to get bumped to 5. Ohio State might be looking at number 6. And then you're probably going to move Alabama to 7. The biggest loser of the night was not Notre Dame. They weren't going anywhere this year. They had lost to Stanford, which is probably the worst team in the Pac-12. They lost to Marshall at home early in the year. They were thoroughly outplayed by Ohio State. So this is not a good Notre Dame team. Yeah, they took it on the chin against SC. I thought maybe they would have an outside shot, but when I turned on, I did get to the game a little bit late. I was looking forward to it. I got to the game a little bit late when I saw they were down and they couldn't get a hand on Caleb Williams. I knew that they had no chance in that game. I know they kind of made it close in the last period. Regardless, they were not going to beat SC, and so SC has been hot. They're moving up. So right now, and why I say mega conference is because, as we stated earlier in the year, USC is jumping to the Big Ten within a couple of seasons. So I see them now as a Big Ten team because they've done all the damage to the Pac-12, and I can tell you right now that the Pac-12 is cringing over the fact that Oregon got beat last night because they were hoping that maybe Oregon would win that game and then go on and play USC in the Friday night game and potentially beat them. They didn't. So now you have 5 teams, and you got Alabama, who you cannot dismiss. Now, Alabama lost to Tennessee in Tennessee on a field goal in a high-scoring game. Then they lost to LSU in LSU. And as I was saying to my buddy last night, that LSU game, yeah, Kelly took a gamble. He could have decided to go to OT. But really, at that point, he had 2 losses. He had nothing to lose by going for the 2 points there and ending it. In fact, by going for the 2 points and getting it, it probably pushed him really into a potential. He could have gone to the Final Four because this is how they're thinking. LSU, had they won last night against Texas A&M, is playing in the championship game against Georgia. If they beat Georgia, how do you deny them a spot in the playoffs? And this is why you're going to see the playoffs now expand to 12 teams within the next couple of years. I wouldn't even be surprised if they did it sooner and somehow find a way to get 12 teams in. But again, here's the thing. Think about the teams that would be involved. You would have still Ohio State and Michigan. You'd have Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Tennessee, Alabama, maybe Clemson, TCU, maybe Kansas State. You see where and Penn State. But the majority of the teams, and then 12, I'm going to leave as a wild card. They would probably throw in, had there been a good team. I'm not even going to say Tulane at this point, but let's just say they throw a bone to the smaller conferences and they go, all right, Tulane, because you can't give it to North Carolina. They just fell apart at the end. You can't give it to Notre Dame, 4 losses. So maybe they throw a bone to somebody else. Or maybe somehow, I don't know, maybe if I'm even trying to think, there's no other team I can think of. There's really no other team. But all right, so they throw a bone maybe to Tulane or something like that, right? If they won their AAC game and then they'd only have, let's say, 1 loss for the year, maybe they give them something. So now you have these 12 teams. Of course, the full 4 would have the bye, and then you'd work your way down to a national championship game. But even with those 12 schools, the majority of them are Big Ten and SEC. So even though it's hard with the 4, right? And believe me, I think that the championship bowl games, since Notre Dame's not a part of it, they want to pound so much of the Big Ten and SEC because they are guiding this. They are running this whole show for the most part, right? The Pac-12 has fallen with the the fleeing of USC and UCLA to the Big Ten, with the SEC just taking whatever schools they think, Oklahoma, Texas, TA&M, etc., that they can grab. It just changes the whole landscape of college football. And that's why I'm kind of hoping, because you may not see another outsider like a TCU for a long time. They have a nice little quarterback in Max Duggan. Not great, but you know what? He's going to get some looks and votes for the Heisman because he has been exciting, dramatic, and TCU, let's face it, they've been a lot of fun. They've been like the comeback kids, the cardiac kids, and they are the Davids going against the Goliaths of the Michigans, the Ohio States, the Alabamas, the Georgias. So here's the interesting thing: next week, TCU has to win. If they don't win, they're done. And as far as I can see, if they lose to Kansas State, you're going to see Kansas State jump over them probably, and TCU fall maybe as far as 12, maybe 10 or 12. Alabama would move up. Ohio State would probably get another look, especially if Michigan just overwhelms Purdue, which everybody expects. I'm almost thinking that they have to put a beat down of like 55-0 against Purdue for Ohio State to get a better look. I mean, Ohio State hurt themselves immeasurably yesterday. They didn't lose on the road, and they didn't lose by a point. I mean, I saw the second half. I just thought they were drilled. And of course, Michigan added icing on the cake with that and they had to score. 3 minutes left, you can't. It's not like you're scoring with 30 seconds left. You got to score. They just destroyed Ohio State yesterday by 23. And Ohio State, I've been saying all along, so I'm wrong again about Michigan. I just think they were overrated. Yesterday, they just pounded. So if Michigan pounds away, Ohio State might move up a notch. But they got to hope that Georgia loses to LSU. And the other game in that fix, they got to hope that TCU loses. If USA wins, it's over for Ohio State. But USC more than likely should defeat Washington. And then they got to hope they're in good shape. All they have to worry, they could hope for Michigan to lose, Georgia to lose, or TCU more than likely. That would be the game that they think would be the greatest chance for one of the upsets, and they would move right in to the championship rounds or the playoffs. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. This is Will O'Toole. Enjoy the rest of November, and I'll see you next week, first full week of December. Thank you to Howard. Bye now.